bring on the phone from the Artesia Historical Museum and Art Center, Mr. Michael Rebman. Good morning.
Good morning.
Hope things are doing well for you.
Oh, things are pretty well over here. We finally have finished most of the groundskeeping work that we had been sort of putting out all that mulch.
Mm-hmm.
And a whole 70 bags of it.
Wow, that's a lot of mulch. And you've talked about this before. The grounds around the museum, there are some unique and interesting things to see there in the grounds. You've planted some things and tried to enhance what people can see or experience if they just come and sit around the outside of the museum.
Well, I did, and now I'm hoping that it grows back this year.
Yeah, so looking forward to that. And I know you're also, before we wrap up the day, I know you want to talk about the student art show, the Russell Floor Student Art Show that's on display, and hopefully you've had a nice reception for that.
Yes, the student art show. It's open to the public in the art center. It'll be on display until April 30th, which is a Saturday.
Okay, during regular museum hours.
Yes, during regular museum hours, 10 to 1 and 2 to 4, Tuesday through Saturday.
Very good. Well, let's go back in history. I think you want to take us back, not exactly on this date in history, but within a day of this date in history. Where are we going today?
We are going to April 20th, 1962.
Okay.
So 60 years and 1 day. The completion of Abo Elementary School. That's the date that they finished construction on it.
The underground school.
Yes, it was a rather unique school for the entire country. Just the idea of building a school as a bomb shelter.
Mm-hmm.
So they started building it in early, let's see if I have my notes correctly, they started in late 1961. They finished April 20th. They had a somewhat special grand opening for certain people in the school district on April 25th, but on June 12th, they had a dedication ceremony.
Mm-hmm.
And it was a rather fancy dedication ceremony because the President Kennedy, took notice of it, sent a congratulatory telegram, and sent his Assistant Secretary of Defense, Stuart Pittman, to Artesia to be at the grand opening dedication.
Wow. That's a pretty important figure. You said the Assistant Secretary of Defense?
Yes.
Wow. So for those that probably don't remember, 1962, the thought or concept of a bomb shelter being built, why was that something of interest to the country at that time?
It was something of interest to the country because this was during the era of the, as they called it, the bomber gap. Was that the 50s? Oh, goodness, there's so much going on in the Cold War. It's sometimes hard to keep it all.
That's right.
Because there was the bomber gap, the missile gap, the cruiser gap, none of which actually existed, but at the time it was on everybody's minds that they thought that the Soviets had more bombers than us, more missiles than us, more cruisers than us, and so there was just a general fear that the United States would be vulnerable to a Soviet nuclear attack.
Mm-hmm.
Of course, the Soviets didn't have the numbers that we thought they had because they had a habit of exaggerating, and as we see today, there's just no telling if the Soviet stuff would have actually worked.
Right.
But there was that fear, and thus there was, in the 60s, it was very popular to try to build bomb shelters. And so you'd see in people's backyards, you would see underground bomb shelters, generally 10 to 15 feet below ground. And in certain older houses, you can still find those today.
Yeah.
And so they decided to build an entire school underground as a bomb shelter, not just for the students, but for people in the immediate neighborhood. They could quickly run over into the school to take shelter, which in theory would work in the early 60s when people were still mostly concerned about Soviet bombers flying over here and dropping bombs or firing short-range cruise missiles.
Mm-hmm.
Later on in the 60s, of course, when you had intercontinental ballistic missiles, that wouldn't matter because they could launch and then hit the United States in 30 minutes.
And you wouldn't necessarily
to warn people.
have time, yeah. Now, was there a difference between a bomb shelter and a fallout shelter? Because I still remember the Civil Defense fallout shelter logo. So was this built as just a bomb shelter, or did they have visions of even using it as a fallout shelter in case of a nuclear blast?
Well, it would be both. And the difference, of course, between a bomb shelter and a fallout shelter is that a bomb shelter was designed to withstand an actual nuclear blast. So they built in anticipation that the Soviets would try to drop nuclear bombs on Artesia to hit either the missile silo in Lake Arthur or to hit the refineries.
Mm-hmm.
And so if people are in the bomb shelter, they will survive. The idea of a fallout shelter is a long-term place to hide, like up to 2 weeks, until radiation levels and fallout from nearby nuclear blasts would diminish a bit.
Mm-hmm.
So in a fallout shelter, you'd stay in there for 2 weeks, and hopefully you have enough food there, and enough water, and enough facilities for everybody. And so the elementary school served as both. It had 19 classrooms, but it also had a lot of storage space for food and emergency supplies. And it had there are 3 staircases, and at the teacher's staircase there was a decontamination shower. And one of the big storage rooms doubled as a morgue and storage room for anybody who died in the shelter.
Interesting. These things had to be thought of, or at least, trying to consider all the different scenarios that might happen if people had to take shelter. Worst case scenario planning, I guess.
It was, but after the 60s, that kind of thinking slowly disappeared, and the original food that they had when they opened in 1962 was still there in the 80s.
Mm-hmm.
So 20-something-year-old cans of food, and even canned crackers and canned bread, and it was all canned, so that way it could survive long term. But even after 20 years, it's a bit questionable.
Yeah. Well, I wonder if it's still there.
No, they actually went through in 1989 and threw out all the old food.
Yeah.
And some of it wound up at the museum, but most of it was thrown out.
What was it labeled? Was it like Abo School labeled, or was it just whoever manufactured it labeled?
Oh, it was Department of Defense labeled.
Department of Defense labeled. Okay.
Yeah, it's the Department of Defense. Well, yeah, one of their divisions was responsible for providing food and supplies at fallout shelters throughout the United States. So at those, wherever you see those fallout shelter signs, there would be like a big barrel full of food and emergency blankets stored away somewhere. At least there used to be.
Used to be, yeah. And they retired the school. When did they retire the school itself as a school? Did you have that in your notes?
I believe that was 1995, if I remember correctly.
Okay. You know, when I first moved to Artesia, when we have bad weather, people would run to Abo School. How it kind of became ingrained in the community since it opened in 1962. People, hey, we got a tornado coming, we need to go to the Abo School. We got a bad weather coming, we need to go to the Abo School. And that's not the case now because it's not used for that purpose. So was this, as far as you could tell, the only one of its kind in the country, or were there some other examples of this type of a combo school bomb shelter that were built in other parts of the country?
For New Mexico, this was the only one. I do not think anybody else actually tried it.
Okay.
Hence, it caught the president's attention in 1962.
Yeah. It's an amazing deal. No, I was just wondering about the food supplies. You could have, if somebody wanted to offer you today, Abo private label crackers, you might want to be a little concerned over how old those crackers are. So that's very interesting. Of course, that was replaced with the Yeso School, which is right next to the Abo School in Artesia.
Yes, that one was built in. Hard date. I believe they were requesting funding for it in 95 with the goal of opening that one in 96.
Right. So, excellent. Is there anything else about that day or about that facility you'd like to share with us? Any other interesting notes that you uncovered?
Well, it's interesting just because it is so unique. In fact, it's registered with the state as a historic building.
Mm-hmm.
Just because the idea of turning an entire school into a fallout shelter and bomb shelter, that's, like I said, that's just so unique. That's something that causes Artesia to really stand out in American history, because most schools, they would just try to tell kids to duck and cover, hide in a hallway. Artesia went the extra mile to actually dig out a giant hole in the ground and build a very thick concrete structure.
Mm-hmm.
All for the goal of protecting children.
Right. And I'm sure there's people that, as kids, went to that school, teachers that taught in that school, and that's probably an interesting conversation to have with folks that experienced for themselves Abo School.
But unfortunately, we can't go back now to it. There's, from what I heard last I read about it, there's still a lot of asbestos in the building.
Right. Well, that was a very common insulating material that was used in that time.
It was, and especially for something intended to be a bomb shelter and fallout shelter that would require a lot of asbestos. Which, of course, means that there's a lot that would need to be cleaned out.
Yep, and that is very expensive to do, and at this point, about the only reason it would be done would be for preservation purposes, because I can't imagine a facility like that could be modernized to use in a current era. I mean, it could, but at what cost,
Not as a school, maybe as a storage facility, but not as a school, just because when it's underground like that, there's no windows. That can't be good for kids.
Yep, that's definitely the case. Well, good. Was there anything else that you'd like to share with us today?
Just remember, we have the Students' Art Show at the museum, at the Art Center. It'll be on display until May 30th, or April 30th.
April 30th, okay.
It's a display of students' artwork from the local schools. And there's some interesting artwork over there. It's all interesting, but it shows, a lot of skill that student artists have.
Yeah. So
it's definitely worth looking at. Even if you don't have a kid whose art is out there, you should definitely come out and see it.
So that's at the Museum and Art Center. Normal museum hours are, I think you said, don't let me say it wrong. Go ahead and say it. Yeah.
Yeah. It's 10 to 1 and 2 to 4, Tuesday through Saturday.
Tuesday through Saturday, and it's on display through Saturday, April 30th. And I'm sure you're already making plans and working on what's coming up next.
Yes, I'm still in the process of developing the next exhibit, but it will open sometime in May. I do not have a hard date yet for it.
Okay, sometime in May. Excellent. Well, Michael, if there's nothing else, I think we'll move on, let you get back at it there, and thank you so much for your time, and we'll chat with you again next week.
All right, thank you.
All right, thank you very much. Before we finish up the show today, let's get Sean Hannity on here and get his thoughts on the news of the day before we wrap it up for the program.
Turn up your radio. Here's the Sean Hannity Morning Minute.
All the radicalism of Joe Biden now is so locked in, he doesn't have the ability to make the adjustments. Bill Clinton did something interesting after he got walloped. In 1994, Newt Gingrich, for the first time in 40 years, became the Speaker of the House. Republicans had been out of power in the House of Representatives 40 years. And all of a sudden, Bill Clinton looked at the political horizon and said, I'm dead meat in 2 years if I don't fix this. Then he came out with the era of big government is over, the end of welfare as we know it. Joe can't do that because his radical, climate alarmist religious cult that rules the Democratic New Green Deal Socialist Party, they won't let him.
Check out the Sean Hannity radio show later today, right here.
Cards issued by Celtic Bank, member FDIC.
Are you the decision maker in your company? Consider Ramp, a better corporate card and spend management platform. Instead of points, Ramp gives you cash back with every purchase. Ramp software puts real money in your pocket, plus total control over who spends what with each vendor. And Ramp's integrated software lets you close your books in hours instead of days. Time is money. Save